Hey, welcome to another edition of Ag News with John Grimes. He's a Ohio State University Extension Beef Coordinator, and he's going to be looking at the economic outcome of the beef industry in 2019. So stay tuned. Hey, welcome to another episode of Ag News. I'm filling in for Duane Rigsby. He's on assignment, and it's my opportunity to find out what's happening in the beef industry in the year 2019. Sitting next to me is John Grimes, the host of Ag News, who's going to be talking about the beef industry, what to expect, and things of that nature. John, thank you for letting me come on your show.
Well, I think it's your show. You're in charge today.
Well, just because I have the notes doesn't mean anything.
No problem. I'm glad to be here today. And today we are going to talk about at least what the economic climate is right now in the beef industry and what that means as we go forward in the next 12 months. It seemed like an appropriate time to talk about that at the end of 2018, and with things in the news such as the Farm Bill and trade wars and tariffs and things like that. It seems like an appropriate time to touch on that. So we're going to start off today looking at kind of where we're at right now on cattle prices. Our first slide today kind of graphically demonstrates that. Actually, Patrick, this is a graph that reflects almost 40 years. It goes through 2018 with some projections for the coming year or two. Cattle Facts is where we get a lot of these statistics, or USDA, and Cattle Facts has been a really good industry resource as far as economic outlook and talking about current economics. So you can kind of graphically see where different classes of cattle's prices have flowed basically since 1980. The blue line reflects calf prices, which generally is lighter weight feeder calves, say 550 pounds. Feeders would be considered heavier, or probably more like 750 pound feeder calves, and then fed cattle as we finish them out for harvest for beef production. So, generally with heavier weights, the prices are a little less, but you can kind of see where we treaded along through the 80s and a good portion of the 90s, and we kind of started up an uptrend in the mid-late 90s, and then you see the real dramatic spike that we saw earlier this decade.
What was the reason for that?
Well, it kind of started in 2011. We had significant drought in the country where a lot of the cattle are.
Okay.
In fact, Texas and Oklahoma were two states that saw 1 million cows leave those two states in 2011. Now, it didn't mean they were harvested. That meant they could have been relocated to another part of the country. But a lot of that factor started the big price spike that we saw in late 2013 through 2015, and it's strictly supply and demand economics, Patrick. It lower numbers. In fact, I believe it was at the beginning of 2014, the nation's beef cow herd was the lowest it had been in almost 60 years.
I see.
So supply and demand, what triggered a lot of that.
Now, is that just that particular graph, is that just for United States?
Yes, that is just United States.
Okay.
And again, thinking about the life cycle, so to speak, of cattle. If a mating happens today, it's another 283 days before the calf is born, and then to get animals to harvest, typically through normal production practices, those animals are probably another 15 to 18 months old. So it takes a while to correct supply and demand.
That's true.
So that is what led a lot to that chart. We did see it start to go down here in the last year or two, and it's progressed along. But the next slide kind of shows where we've changed the cow herd. You saw in 1980 how much higher we were. We had actually approached over 39 million, going towards 40 million in the early 80s, and then you kind of see the trend went down for the decade of the 80s, and then kind of stabilized for a couple of years, went up a little bit in the early 90s, and then since the mid 90s it's kind of been a steady decline, and it really becomes pronounced there in that 2011, 12, 13 range, and you see it kind of bottomed out in 2014 and then has built back up, and it looks like, based on numbers, that we are going to stabilize around 32 million cows, and who knows what would change that, and we're going to talk about that over the next few minutes, what factors may or may not impact numbers and prices. But it does appear that for all intents and purposes, rapid expansion is stabilized, and over the next year or two maybe add a few 100,000, which sounds like a lot, but nationally it wouldn't be. But just since 2014 up till the beginning of 2019, we're going to add right at 3 million cows, and that is a lot.
Now the sustainability, you were right at 32 million. Is that a good number, or should it increase?
Under current circumstances, and we'll go in more detail, that's doable. I mean, that is sustainable. Of course, there's economies and trade and politics. We'll talk about that in more detail. So we do believe it is sustainable. So
good.
We'll move on to what does those numbers mean in terms of beef production. Our next slide kind of shows that, and it would not exactly mirror that cow chart, but what this is essentially showing you is, with a lot less cows, we're being more productive. You remember those numbers from the early 80s where we were up over 39 million cows, and now we're down around 32. But look how beef production, just pounds of beef produced, have changed over that time. And what it shows that technology and farmers are more efficient.
I see.
We're producing more with less, which in today's environment with challenges for land resources and water resources, that's very important. So I think that's a tribute to a lot of fronts. It's a tribute to the research that's been done by industry or universities, the technology we've got, and just farmers doing more with less. I think that's what a lot of this chart says when you think about the previous chart that we showed you about cow numbers are down, but production's up. So, and we'll talk about what this means in terms of prices. We do have competition. Our next slide reflects that. Poultry and pork are our main competitors for protein dollars here in this country, and you can see, based over, again, kind of that same 1980s, the last 40 years, pork has been relatively stable. That's the red bars, and then poultry, you see, have kind of expanded. And so today, you would layer on top of this, beef would be about 57 pounds per capita. Poultry or pork is in the mid 40s, so beef would be about 10 pounds more. But poultry, just graphically looking at this, is roughly 100 to 110 pounds per person. So that kind of gives you this distribution of poundage: poultry, then beef, then pork. Domestically, this is domestic figures, and this is from USDA.
Now the poultry, that would include turkeys?
Yes, turkey, chicken,
ducks, and
duck would be minor, but but basically large part chickens. Of course, there's just coming off of the peak season for turkey, but that would include poultry in those numbers. So that gives you an idea how the consumers are spending their dollars today. And obviously, as the economy does better and people make more money, they tend to buy more protein. less salad and more meat.
Yeah, that's true.
That's typically what happens both domestically and across the globe. So that's, again, just kind of laying the background of what's out there for the consumer to buy. Our next slide, and again, I'm not an economist by trade for sure, but this gives you a little bit about beef demand. And there's lots of things that go into it, but obviously the price of beef itself has something to do with it, but also the price of our competitors. If chicken or pork offer a much cheaper option, that's going to impact demand. But that, if you look closely, you'll see that dotted green line averages around 112 over the last 20 years, and you can kind of see that we're still above average. So demand has been good, and I think that's a little bit of a tribute to our current economic status. I think consumers are buying beef, and we'll talk about in more detail what kind of beef they like, where that's going down the road. But this is, again, from USDA. I know Kansas State had some study work done in on this, and again, the yellow bars are projections where we're going, but it does look like beef demand is certainly above average.
Right.
And that's encouraging to beef producers, that hopefully there'll be somebody out there to buy. But if you look, kind of the low point is right after 2008 when we had the economic downturn.
Yes.
So this very much is just pure economic demand, and the low spot on this 20-year chart, second lowest spot, is right after the downturn in the late 2000s.
Just out of curiosity, I know that Ohio is one of those beef industries, beef production, but where are the majority of production? Is it all over United States?
Beef is in every 50 states, including Hawaii and Alaska.
Oh, but, I didn't know that.
But if you just want to know where the largest amount of production is, just draw a belt around the middle of the country. Start down in Texas and go up through the Dakotas. That belt through there would be the largest areas. You would include Texas, Oklahoma, Kansas, Nebraska, the Dakotas, and then you think of other bigger states. Missouri is a very big state. Iowa is a strong state. Actually, the largest beef cow state east of the Mississippi is Kentucky.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Kentucky's 8th or 9th, I think, as far as ranking. So Kentucky's a very important state. The three biggest states east of the Mississippi would be Kentucky, Tennessee, and Florida. There are a lot of cows in Florida. So just a little trivia there for you. But,
that is interesting. Florida, I did not expect.
Well, it's there's parts of Florida that's not all tourist traps and things like that. So,
and old people, huh?
No, I'm not saying anything because I'm getting older all the time. But our next slide reflects a really interesting phenomenon that's going on, and this relates to demand, is quality. Prime is the top grade. If we talk about quality grades of beef cattle, we're talking about the flecks of fat inside the ribeye or steak that you buy. And prime would be the highest, choice would be next, select would be third. And those are, we're not going to get into what that looks like today, but just visualize those flecks of marbling or fat inside the ribeye. And really this industry has made a big change in the last 10 years as far as quality graded beef cattle. Now, as recently as 2006 and 7, where you kind of see that low point in the middle of the graph here, 40% of the beef was grading select, which is leaner, but it does not have as much flavor due to lack of marbling. Today, that number has been cut in over half. It's like 16, 17, or 17 or 18% is select today. But you see prime being that green, that's what you would consider your high-priced steaks at the store or at a white tablecloth restaurant. But branded beef programs such as certified Angus beef, certified Hereford beef, there's several different programs, have put an emphasis on higher grading cattle, and I think the consumer has benefited from that. It's just amazing how much has changed, and it really took a steep change. You think about how cow numbers have changed in this decade, where we had a lot of sold off in the early 2010 decade. Well, we've replaced them with better cattle.
I see.
And part of this is also price of corn. Price of corn has been relatively low historically compared to some other times, and so cattlemen are doing a better job of feeding cattle as well. So those two factors, genetic change in the cow herd, these last 2 or 3 million cows we've added this decade, plus good nutrition programs have really improved how cattle have graded. So I think, and it also plays a big part in exports. We're going to get into exports here just momentarily, but quality has impacted our trade as well.
Would you say that the universities, like University of Kansas, Ohio State University, many of the land-grant universities have been instrumental in helping to increase the production and the quality?
Oh, absolutely. I think the research that land-grant schools do, and you talked about Ohio State, we're talking about schools like University of Kentucky, Purdue, Kansas State, Texas A&M, Colorado State. Those are your land-grant schools that do agriculture research, and I do think it's been a big key to it. I am proud, and I'll be a little bit biased here, to talk about certified Angus beef is based here in Ohio. It's in Worcester. It had its 40th anniversary this year.
Great.
The founding standards, the grading standards they follow, Dr. Bobby Van Stavern at Ohio State, back when I was in school, back in the day, was a big part of that, Patrick. So I do think land-grant schools have contributed. But our next slide, we are talking about exports, and this graphically shows how important it is to us and the other species. You kind of see over the last decade how that trend line is edging up. We export quite a bit of our product. In fact, beef is around 13% today of our production is exported. And that's an important part of the overall economy. The blue bars here reflect beef, the red bars pork, and of course green is poultry. It really hurt us in 2003. It's been hard to believe 15 years. At about this time, right before Christmas in 2003, we had our first diagnosed case of mad cow disease.
Yeah.
And that basically eliminated a lot of our Southeast Asia exports. You see how that blue bar is so small in 2004. And we've got it back. It's steadily increased, but that shows you to all three species how important exports are, but we do not export as much as pork or poultry, but the beef we do export generally is higher quality stuff, and that goes back to that previous chart where we showed prime and choice going up. So that
what are some of the major countries that we export to?
Today, Japan and South Korea would far and away be our highest value destinations. Of course, Mexico and Canada follow along as well. So those, I don't know the exact ranking today, but I believe it's Japan, South Korea, and it's close between like Mexico and Canada. So that's
interesting.
That's really important. So that gives you some perspective there where we go. Now the next chart shows a little bit more detail just for beef, imports and exports. And if you notice, the blue line is exports, the red line is imports. And historically, since 2000, we've probably been a bigger importer than we have an exporter. And you see how that blue line really reduced in 2004.
Yeah.
And now it kind of trades back and forth whether we're a net importer or an exporter. But this year, exports are up 11%, and they're projecting they'll be up 6% next year, which is really strong. The one that's really grown is South Korea. Japan's always been a strong partner, except for when mad cow, a lot of that deficit you see in the mid-2000s was Japan, Southeast Asia, but the strength you see more recently is attributed primarily, Canada and Mexico have always been important partners, and of course, we hope the new version of NAFTA stabilizes that version.
Yes.
And you're hearing talk about tariffs and things like that. But far as the global customer wanting high quality beef, U.S. is the primary source. Now there are other competitors, Australia, Argentina, Brazil, those kind of countries are probably providing more of the select type beef, the leaner grass-fed beef. Our beef is known worldwide as the prime source of grain-fed young beef, and so just keep that in mind. But
imports, where do we usually import the beef
I would
from?
say Australia, or South America, Brazil, Argentina. Those would be the primary sources. Now, one thing I can give you more detail about this year is thus far, beef exports have added over $320 per head of market animals, and what if you put it on a 1,400-pound steer, a typical market steer today, that's right at 23 cents per pound.
Wow.
So those are real dollars.
Yeah.
Those are real dollars. So we need to keep in mind the value. And I don't like politics, but when you hear about trade wars, tariffs, those things do impact us.
Yes, they do.
And we need to pay attention to that. So,
you're absolutely right.
That is really a big part of our business today. And
well, not only directly the beef, but also the different components that make up the beef.
Well,
corn, feed.
Okay, I'll just give you an example. African swine fever is a big disease that's showing up in China in pork. So if pork had more of that has to be imported, that changes things for beef. If more of our pork is going overseas, then that gives us a little more leverage here in this country.
Yeah.
That's an example how one species could really impact another. And if they're putting more tariff on pork in another country, does that open up things for beef or vice versa?
Yeah.
So it's a global market, and so it's really important that we pay attention to those kind of things. Next, we're going to talk a little bit about crop acreage and how that obviously can impact the livestock industry. Corn and soybeans are big sources of energy and protein for all those species that we're talking about, but historically this has been a corn country. We've raised more corn than beans, but notice in the last couple of years, due to economics and different factors, soybeans have actually nudged ahead of corn in the last couple of years. Now, it's expected because of prices, and again, soybeans are a big export commodity, but some of the tariffs are challenging that, so CattleFax and USDA do expect that corn probably will be more acres planted to corn next year. Now wheat, I think back early in my extension career, wheat was such a valuable crop rotation crop, and it's been an important cereal grain. But just you see kind of a gradual trend for wheat acres to go down compared to corn and soybeans, and a lot of that's economic driven. But those are the main three grain crops that we do concern about. Of course, obviously beef, we don't have a number here, but hay or forage acres are very important to the beef industry, whether we're talking about pasture or hay. Hay acreage has declined. Some of that increase that you see in corn and soybeans has come from forage acres taken out of production, and we do worry about that in the beef industry, whether we do have enough. Hay prices got relatively high at the end of last winter. We did, but we've built back some supplies. We had lots of moisture this year in this part of the country, and in most hay producing regions, supplies got built up some. At least in Ohio, I am worried a little bit about quality and how that's going to reflect farmers this winter, because we had a wet spring. It was late getting harvest made. So those things all factor in. So, Patrick, we've talked about some big picture factors. Our next slide is what at least CattleFax is going to show their price expectations for the coming year. This is kind of a busy slide, a black and white slide that shows price projections, and I'll try to give you some of the cutoff there. The first slide, we're talking about the fresh retail price, like what you would expect to see at the store, the average price of beef across, and you can kind of see that's going to edge up just a little bit compared to the last couple of years. The range, I don't actually have that in front of me, but the range is what you're seeing, the high point being cut off. But the more important thing I want you to look at is 2019 compared to 2018 and 17, and you can see beef hasn't changed a lot, but they're expecting a few cent increase for the coming year. The cutout is the whole carcass. That's what, if you were going to buy a side of beef or something like that, that's what it would cost per pound, and that's what that was reflective of. And that's for virtually saying, if we can bring that back up, you don't see much of a change there. The third line is fed steer price, or what a live animal is expected to bring, and they show that being down just a little bit. With all this increase in numbers, we have more supply, and we really haven't changed harvest capacity. So somebody says, well, if fed steer prices are going down, why would we see beef prices going up? That's called leverage. The packer has an advantage right there. They can kind of control the supply, so that's not getting out of hand, but you kind of can see these numbers don't change a lot. Now, feeder calves, there we go, that shows the whole range, high to low, and there are some seasonality to these things. Feeder calf prices, the 750-pound steer and the 550-pound steer, they do expect to come down a fair amount. If the feedlots aren't going to make enough money, they're not going to pay as much for feeder calves, so that's what you're seeing there. Utility cow price would be the cull animal, the cow that's no longer productive and is sent to market. Again, more of those kind of cows are available. Prices go down. Hide and offal, that is, offal is the internal parts that we don't see normally, the kidney, the livers, the intestines, things like that. There are people that do buy that, but not as much demand for that. And then corn prices, relatively unchanged, again, depend on weather will impact that. So this is Cattle Fax's projection for prices, and gives you the range. And again, that's
and I think because there's a lot of different parts of the industry involved in the processing, it's just not the beef cattle farmers that are gaining more money throughout the year.
Oh, there's they talk about vertical integration. I mean, there's many steps. I mean, from when it leaves the farm and gets harvested, we have to have processors. There's transportation involved, and then we have retail. The Krogers, the Walmarts, the Myers, places like that, to sell the product in restaurants. And then we talked about the export market. So it's complicated. But today those figures are based on what we know the best at this time, and hopefully it'll be no more than a worst case scenario there. So as we wrap this up, we talk about a lot of things here, but production cycle, I think we have a picture of what the average cow-calf guy does, and you can see how that green bar got so high in 14-15. It was kind of a perfect storm. And if you look over the 40 years, there's not too many years that it's below zero, but you see that yellow bar is how it's being projected out. There's not as much profit for the cow-calf producer, and that's kind of the lifeblood that starts all this. So as we wrap up, I think our next slide, we'd show a picture of the cow. That's kind of our factory that we talk about here and that produces. But again, for her to raise a calf and get bred, it takes 283 days. Raise that calf, typically it's weaned at 7 or 8 months, and then we probably all total, by the time the calf's weaned off the cow until it's harvested, all total that calf's life is usually about 18 months on average.
That's interesting.
But if you have any questions, my contact contact information here, based out of the Piketon Research Station. My office number, my cell number, my email's all there. I encourage you to check out our beef team website at beef.osu.edu for more detailed beef information.
That sounds great. Yeah, one of the things I want to mention to the listening audience, that you cover a variety of different topics, including raising calf, what it takes
We talk about forages
and things of that nature.
Yes.
And so I encourage the viewing audience to go on the Ohio State University South Center's YouTube channel and look at all the different ag news programs that John and Duane have been showing. You'll find a lot of information. I'm Patrick Dengel again. We're with John Grimes, Ag News. Thank you for watching.